Hello everyone, welcome to ITOM Spotlight, the show where we dive into the minds of today's innovative technology leaders and discuss with them about the recent trends, strategies, and best practices that they follow in their business to achieve success. I'm your host Barani. I'm the head of marketing for ManageEngine ITOM Solutions. In this episode, we are speaking with someone who has a profound knowledge in IT strategy, innovation, and technology execution. He has over 2 decades of experience in IT infrastructure, cloud operations, digital transformation, and cybersecurity. He is Jason James. People call him JJ. He is the CEO at Aptos Retail, based out of US. He is also associated with Forbes, where he writes about IT investments and IT technology trends. Welcome to our show, JJ. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
So, before we proceed, can you give a brief introduction about your role at Aptos and what's your association with Forbes?
I'm currently CIO of Aptos. We are the leader in retail software. So our entire focus is the retail industry. That's everything from order management to point of sale to next generation CRM and next generation point of sale. And so we serve such industry leaders as Tommy Bahama, Michael Kors, New Balance, and others. And so our entire specialty is within the retail space. I oversee our cloud operations, so that's the delivery of our cloud, our SaaS solutions. I oversee our cybersecurity and compliance, as well as internal IT systems. You mentioned Forbes Tech Council. I've been an active member of that. I usually write from the perspective of what we're seeing within the retail sector. So transformation, cybersecurity risk, things that would affect retailers. I've worked in various industries, but for the last 2 years, I've been working within the retail space, specifically around SaaS solutions.
Great. So, in this podcast, we are going to discuss about how to get the IT investment strategy right. We want to hear some tips about managing the IT infrastructure. What kind of ROIs are organizations expecting from AI investments? And finally, some tips from you about how to manage this current economic situation yet achieve success in business. Yeah, so we will jump into the detailed discussion. So today, with all the digital innovations, IT leaders are not only looked upon as technology leaders, but they are also looked upon as business strategists. So based on your personal experience so far, could you give us some insights like what IT decision that you took had a direct impact on your business growth or vice versa?
Sure. I would say, I mean, thinking back, a lot of my background's been in multiple industries, but when you look at sort of an underlining common denominator, a lot of those have been SaaS businesses. And what I mean by that, they've been a software solution serving, mostly business to business organizations. It's been everything from supply chain logistics to retail to analytics to healthcare tech. And in doing so, what you look at with those investments, and say you're making investments in cloud expansion, you're going into different regions, you're going into different geographies. And so uh, being able to make investments around international compliance has allowed us has allowed me and multiple companies to be able to actually support global expansion. Because as you move into different sectors, and especially depending on the particular vertical you're in, not only do you have to have data sometimes geolocated in those areas, but you have to have compliance to be able to support that, whether it be GDPR or ISO 27001, or in cases where I was in healthcare tech, high trust. And so, investing in compliance with capability um, helps drive the business, right? It ensures that you can land the larger enterprise contracts. It ensures that you can support change in landscape in terms of global compliance as well, or as well as industry compliance.
Okay. I would like to have a follow-up question. Like for any CIO to make their investment strategy successful, they have to have a solid plan. So how do you think that someone should approach to work on the right IT strategy and to make an investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you have to understand is what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve, right? It's not just about the investment in the technology. And in many cases, there's several technologies that, you know, once you go down to a vendor or partner path, you can select multiple ones. And achieve results. But the ultimate goal is, what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve with the technology? So that requires that you meet with stakeholders. That requires that you meet and have meaningful conversations with whomever the stakeholder is. Obviously, you've got, executive sponsors, you've got departments that'll be impacted, but at the end of that chain, is it impacting your end users? Is it impacting your clients? What are you making the investment for? Are you making the investment to shore up compliance? Are you making the investments to speed up productivity, introduce new features? But you've got to understand, what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve, and from there you back in a technical solution that enables you to do that. I think the role of the CIO, first and foremost, you have to be a business leader. Secondly, you have to be a very strong technologist. In my past, I've had CFOs say, "Hey, JJ, I'm thinking about making our controller the next CIO," and I'm like, "Why don't I make my head of network ops your controller and see how well that works out?" Right? I think you have to have a very strong technical acumen, because you've got to understand the technologies you're implementing more so than ever before. I think when we think about the rise of AI, understanding how those large language models will be used, understanding the ethics behind it, the guidance is really important. So again, you have to have a bit of both, right? Business leader as well as strong technical acumen.
Okay, so basically you're saying that you should first evaluate the ROI, what kind of benefit you're going to reap from this investment, whether it's on the business side or you're automating stuff on the IT side, or it's going to enhance something. So basically, what is the outcome that you want to achieve? And if that is valuable, then you can go ahead.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, though, when we think about it, the outcomes sometimes are a little bit harder to calculate. And so when we think about ROI, especially around the cybersecurity aspect of it, it's a little bit harder to calculate, right? The biggest risk is the impact of not doing it, right? And so when we think about ROIs of doing things, sometimes um, your calculations don't always work out. And what I mean by that is, it's not always calculus. It's not always a mathematical formula. Again, when you think about the impact of reducing risk, the impact of that risk far exceeds the investment sometimes. The unfortunate aspect of it is, what we see across multiple industries is those investments aren't made until after the fact. And so what I encourage all CIOs and CISOs out there is to make sure those investments are being made, and make sure you're meeting with your CFO, your CEO, to make them understand, while it's sometimes difficult, especially on the cybersecurity side, to calculate the ROI, help them understand where the risk will come from if the investments aren't made. And again, that's very hard at smaller organizations. It's very hard at organizations where maybe they don't have the economic growth. But the largest impact you can have on an organization is a security breach. When you look at the statistics, a large breach, many of those organizations are gone within 5 years. And so again, ROI is important, but sometimes there's ROIs that uh, are, not about return on investment, but about risk reduction.
Yeah. But in such cases, like say for example, when you take these kind of discussions to the board or to the CEO or CFO, they could not get the big picture right. So how do you convince them in getting these kind of investments approved, especially if it's a
Yeah.
non-tech board?
Yeah. Number one, a CIO, any business leader, you have to be a really good storyteller. And it's not about just conveying the facts, it's about conveying the vision. And the vision of it is, it's your responsibility to help them see what the outcome is, whether it be the outcome of an investment, the outcome of risk reduction, the outcome of threats. The idea is, you have to be in there, and you can't let it go. Sometimes there's sometimes where it's so critical. It is ultimately not only the risk of the organization, but the risk of your career. When you sit in those C suites, regardless of it's a CFO or a CIO or CISO or CEO, you've put your name on the line, you've put your reputation on the line. You're there to protect not only the organization and the risk of the organization and the fiduciary responsibility of the organization, but you're also there to protect your own brand and your own reputation. And so, I tell leaders all the time, don't back down. There's sometimes um, something that you're so passionate about, whether it be about an investment, Don't back down sometimes until you're forced to back down.
Okay, makes sense. See, next I want to ask a couple of niche questions related to investments. So, as a CIO, when you're going to invest in some technology or in some particular new equipment or something, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be an investment made on a particular vendor. So, how do you evaluate a vendor and what traits are very important?
I encourage people to stop looking at vendors and start looking at partners. Start looking at someone that is there to understand your technological needs, your business needs, the challenges you have as a department or leader, and those that are going to be there to not only support the technology, but support you when a project either goes astray, has some difficulty starting. But again, what you're looking for is not just someone that can deliver on an outcome of a technical solution, but someone that can be there as a partner as you grow your organization, as your organization goes through challenges. I've been fortunate enough in my career to find vendors that became partners. And once they become partners, not only do they help me succeed in my current role, whatever that future role is, I like to bring them back because I think that's important. It's about a long-term relationship. So if you are in any form of business, it's all about building relationships. It's all about making sure that you're there to support your clients, that you're there to make them succeed. In exchange, you also succeed, right? You get not only a referenceable client, but you might get a referenceable client multiple times that can help you grow your business if you are a provider. And so stop looking at vendors, start looking for partners.
Okay. So, there will be some cases where when you have a partner or a vendor, their commitment to the market or the organization changes. There could be multiple reasons. Say, for example, they can get acquired by another company, or they get investment from some other private equity firms where their entire direction changes, and in turn they pass on their technological challenges as well as like financial challenges to the customer. So the customer ends up paying more, or like they suffer in terms of these kind of scenarios. So how do you see this kind of situations and how somebody can overcome these kind of?
I think we've all been through it, right? I think when you think about what is happening out there in the markets, there's acquisition targets all the time. I mean, if you um, look at Wiz, right? One of the biggest rock stars when it comes to cybersecurity, and the fact is, they're an acquisition, been acquired by Google, and I'm sure they're going to do a wonderful job with it. But there's so many instances of you go down a path with a partner or vendor, and next thing you know, they're owned by another organization, or they might be owned by another competitor. And the thing is, it's important that as those changes occur, that you get with your partner and say, look, here's, I know you're going through this, but here's what I expect out of the transition. Here's what I'm hoping to look for, because sometimes they don't always work out. And what you'll find is in those cases, you have to reevaluate the investment. So when the contract comes due, maybe you're upfront with your partner and say, this had been a good relationship and now it's not. And I know some of it is out of your control, but it also means we're going to market and we're going to look at another vendor or partner. And so those things happen. I think what we are going to see in the industry is every bit of economic downturn, you get a lot of changes. I think what you're going to see in the market right now, you're going to see a lot of organizations probably delay any kind of IPO, initial public offerings. I think what you're going to see is a lot of acquisitions by private equity. Private equity is sitting on multi-trillion dollars worth of dry powder to go out and do acquisitions. What they've been waiting for is really um, sometimes discounts in the market, and we're starting to see that there's a lot more traction with larger players. You're seeing players that had one time been public go private through private equity. You're going to see private equity turn out and spin out some of their stars back into public companies. It's just the nature of business right now. And I think regardless of what happens in the business, you have to stay in contact with those partners and vendors you've worked with and set expectations, and know that if those expectations aren't met, there are alternatives out there.
Yeah. On the other hand, from the perspective of vendors and partners also, during these kind of tough situations, they want to expand their business, and one other option they see is that like either getting acquired or getting some investment, as kind of a consolidation happening in the market where they are merging with other firms so that they address the market with a much more bigger potential.
Yeah, I think obviously that happens. I mean, if you think about how well, again, I'll pick on Google and Wiz because they're both great organizations, and Google's been a great partner of ours. Is that I think in going after a company like Wiz, it's smart for Google, right? And it's smart for Wiz because it opens up a much larger service offering that if you are either entities that you can offer your clients. And I think that's a smart move. I think what many organizations, especially again, I've worked a lot in private equity, I think what they're looking at is what is the larger portfolio of offerings we can offer our clients. I think for standalone organizations, which you're also going to see those that don't have private equity funding and maybe not public, are also doing the same thing, right? They're looking to determine what are adjacencies they can go into in terms of expansion, what are additional um, tools and service offerings that their clients have been asking for. Some of those will come organically and be built, and some will be a buy model where they'll go in and say, hey, this little niche company is doing this. We're going to see a ton of this in the AI space, right? So if you look at what's happening in venture capital right now and the investments being made, the vast majority of those investments are coming in AI startups. Probably second to that is probably cybersecurity, but not at the same extent of what's happening in AI. And so when these niche solutions come up, a lot of organizations are going to be like, well, they're 2 years ahead of where we would be. It's by far more cost effective just to acquire that. So we're going to see a lot of add-ons from private companies, from PE-backed companies, from even public companies. We're seeing it right now. The majority uh, of deals we're seeing have an AI component. The majority of venture capital funding we see have an AI component. Uh, we've been talking about cloud for 20 years now. We're going to be talking about AI for 20 years. I do think the majority of the conversation today is being taken up by GenAI. But when I think about the real impact of AI, I think what you're going to see is more and more enterprise organizations are going to look at agentic AI technologies to actually empower their business.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, makes sense. Yes. So, JJ, I want to slowly divert our conversation to digital transformation and AI. So, I know that you have a lot of experience in digital transformation, successfully implementing this across Aptos and other various organizations. So, digital transformation continues to be a top priority for organizations because they see the benefits and they see the business outcomes, and they kind of expand their infrastructure from basically behind the firewall to all over the cloud and beyond that. So can you give some tips to our audience, like what kind of strategy someone should follow to manage this kind of a huge infrastructure scale which they are not used to handling?
First of all digital transformation is a cultural transformation. That's where you have to start. So the technology, I'm not discounting that of how difficult that is, but the biggest impact or impediment you'll find is a cultural transformation. In many cases, these are long established solutions that have been in place that aren't ideal, but have longevity. And getting users to understand why you should go with a new solution, why you should go with, next generation technology that they'll have to be trained on, they'll have to be learned on. You've got to have advocates in the business. And so what you have to do is realize this is not a one person show. It's not the CIO, CTO, CISO, whatever it is, being out there pushing for this transformation. You've got to build advocates within those business units that can help drive your vision, understand your vision, articulate your vision. And so, you start almost as a political exercise to say, I'm going to find those champions. I'm going to find the ones that can help drive this message home, make sure the adoption happens, push it down to the departmental level. If you start these digital transformations as a top-down approach, you'll most likely fail or be massively delayed. And so, the important aspect of it all is not the technology itself whatsoever. It's the human aspect of it, the desire to change, building somewhat of a smoldering fire that takes off to become a long-lasting burning desire to change. But again, that's not going to come from one person. Look for those advocates, look for people that have influence within a department, which I'll tell you, they're not always the department heads, right? You've got people that have been there for a while that others look up and listen to. Put on your anthropology hat. Put on the idea that you've got to dig in. You've got to understand the culture. You've got to understand how people use these tools. You've got to understand the cost for maintaining this legacy, because you're going to be politically selling this solution to various parts of the business, right? You got to have the CFO understand the ROI. You've got to have the CEO understand the technological, justification to it and why this will improve the business, how this will help scalability and profitability and productivity. You've got to have your, head of client services understand how this is going to perhaps impact and improve customer sat. And so the idea is it's not about here's the next shiny object, here's how much it's going to save us, here's how we're going to do it. Start with the why, start with how people use it, start advocating, finding those champions, digging in, having them spread the message. When you're not in the room, the same message should still be spread. The same message of change and the desire to change and the desire to transform needs to be coming from multiple people in multiple departments at multiple levels. And so again, think about it as a cultural transformation.
Okay. Okay, great insights, JJ. So, if you look at organizations who have already began that transformation and in the midway or like almost achieved that, for them they rely heavily on cloud. So they see hyperscalers as one attractive option because of the dynamic agility that it has and easy to scale, but it also comes at a cost. So most organizations who are advanced in terms of digital transformation are spending more on cloud. So how to get transparency into the cloud cost and how somebody should manage it and keep within the budget?
Yeah, I'm not sure where at what point the idea of cloud being cheaper got stuck in sort of the business lexicon, but that's never true. And that's also never the reason to go to it. The reason is about, flexibility, elasticity, the ability to scale up, scale down. But with that comes a new level of financial responsibility, financial monitoring, the whole FinOps framework. The idea is, are you looking at how your loads are being handled? Are you doing those in the most optimal way? Are you shutting down unused portions of the cloud? The ability to do it is based on speed. It's not based on cost. And so there are more cost-effective ways to do it. But with any new advancements, at the heart of all cloud computing, you have to think it's utility-based computing. The more you use of a utility, the more you consume, and the more the costs go up. And so you have to be very mindful about what's getting done, what workloads are being done. So it also goes back to being a strong technologist from a cloud architectural perspective, understanding how if loads were built in a traditional data center, they don't always migrate equally. You can't start with the same sort of mindset of, hey, we built out the largest servers we can find to run in our data center. It doesn't, you don't want to take on that same mindset in the cloud. The idea is how do you start small and scale upward? And so mindsets have to change. But with what's happening, especially in cloud adoption, and especially what's happening in global economic conditions right now, you have to be very mindful about where you're making those investments, where you're making that spend, monitoring that spend, making sure you don't get uh, VMs and instances running out of control and driving your costs through the roof. Because uh, ultimately you're responsible for that budget. And what will happen is those that don't get a good handle on it will find themselves updating their resume.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Now I want to move ahead and talk about AI. So we all know that what AI is going to bring to us, like what kind of productivity benefits it's going to bring to us. But can you break down in detail, like what kind of ROIs are being looked upon by C-level suite of people to invest in AI?
I think, well, I'm going to talk about not us, but I'm going to talk about the industry. I think what you're finding now is there is a rush to adopt some of these tools without proper ROI planning. I think what you're seeing in a lot of organizations is they're trying to move around R&D dollars to say, hey, we got to get ahead of this because we feel like we're already behind. And what are we doing in terms of these tools and how they can help? And so what you're seeing and what you're hearing from a lot of different CIOs is a mixed bag of results. Again, when I talked about, the lion's share of press around AIs around the whole Gen AI space, and I'm not saying that's not important, but when I think about, many businesses and their ability to craft PowerPoints and images faster and write text faster, that's not going to be a game changer. The game changer is how do you ultimately foresee a workforce in 10 years where 15% of your workforce is non-human? And that ROI will come in the fact of, moving faster, uh, less, headcount dollars, less healthcare dollars. And, right now, I think there's a huge sort of race to figure it out and then look at ROI later. I do think, we're moving this year beyond a point that it's not all hype cycle. I think when we think about last year, there was this huge hype cycle to say, oh, this can be the end all for be all for everything. That's not the case. And again, I think the power of agentic AI is where we're going to see the ultimate value. And I don't think, right, we're going to see, um, a mass amount of our workforce being replaced overnight. But obviously, we're seeing it change. I mean, if you look at that memo that came out from Duolingo about, the fact is they wouldn't use contractors anymore. That, that work has to be done by artificial intelligence. They've already replaced all their translation contractors with AI, which is an incredibly powerful use case. But I think right now is that when companies get to the point that they do have to look for ROI, what is it doing, right? Is it getting data delivered faster, data delivered more accurately? There's a cost involved when it comes around accuracy. Is there a headcount reduction? If you're a large organization, you might have substantial spend with third-party contractors. I can imagine with Duolingo, you know, the amount that they were paying contractors for translation services, they saw a significant ROI in doing it. I'm positive they did. And not only with the speed of the translations, but considering how good the accuracy of the translations from AI has gotten, I'm sure they saw a tremendous ROI. But I do think right now, and there's so much pressure by organizations and boards to take not necessarily a pragmatic approach, but let's spend some dollars to quickly figure out how quickly we can get a return, or to get something implemented. The other aspect I see of it, started to put on a more negative hat, is it almost seems like every startup out there is tacking AI onto a product and hoping it increases their valuation, which is not always the case. And so, as a CIO, you have to be very mindful that it's not always artificial intelligence they're selling, but the hope that AI will make their products better. And in some cases, it will. But be very mindful about when you're making those investments. Uh, what are you paying for? What are you being licensed for? Is that feature set actually going to do what it says it's do? And it's a mixed bag. And I don't want to pick on Microsoft, but I am going for a second. You look at Copilot. Copilot is really incredible in the Teams edition when you look at how it takes notes within a meeting, how it summarizes that. But it's still insufficient when we talk about PowerPoint creation and really use cases within Excel. Will they get there? Yeah, but I think a lot of organizations are bolting on AI, looking at AI investments, and sometimes the ROI is not properly planned.
Okay, yeah. Maybe not at least in the shorter run, but in the longer run, definitely they will be looking at the ROI.
Well, in the long run, they're going to have to, because what you're going to see is there's massive rising costs with this. If you look at the cost within cloud computing, the AI solutions have a premium. If you're in a traditional data center, the energy consumptions from these GPUs are significantly greater, and so the investments in using these tools are high. And so you can't embrace it forever without getting an ROI. It's
Yep.
not possible, and it's just not economically feasible. And so more and more organizations are going to be very mindful about what the return they're getting. Right now may be sort of that rush to find a solution, but the solutions will be found, and then from there, once innovation is met, you'll start to see cost justification be tightened up a lot more.
Okay. See, one interesting point you made is the energy. See, if you look at large enterprises' commitment to sustainability, they kind of invested more in sustainability efforts. So, even major technology trends show that large enterprises prefer or like allocate more budget to sustainability. They want to go green and reduce the carbon footprint. But on the other hand, these kind of AI investments require huge computing power, which you have to achieve through other like traditional methods of power and energy. So how do you think organizations will like strike a right balance between achieving AI capabilities, on the other hand also like go green?
I don't think they're going to go green anytime soon. And what I mean by that, so I live in Georgia, and so Georgia is the first U.S. state in decades to bring online a nuclear power plant. That's Vogtle, and it was years behind schedule and billions over budget. But a lion's share of that new nuclear power plant will be dedicated to data centers, and specifically data centers powering AI. What organizations are finding is their green initiatives, because of this AI consumption, are just way off track. And so they're buying up carbon credits to offset some of that. But that's a shell game ultimately. You know, um, they're just not going to be sustainable for a while. I do think when you think about really the impact of DeepSeek was showing that AI could be brought to bear at a much more cost effective, lower energy consumption model. And that rung the bell, and it woke up everybody to say, whoa, 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 if they can do it, why aren't you doing it? And it's going to force these large AI companies to say, okay, now our newer models, we've got to get more energy efficient. They haven't had to get more energy efficient, right? What they did was threw everything they had at it and said, oh, wow, look at how fast these results are. Um, you're going to find slower, lower cost, lower energy consumption models come out in the next few years that people are like, I don't need an instant result. I just need accurate data. Can I have this process run not instantly, but within seconds? Can it take minutes? Can it take hours? And as a result, can I look for more energy conservative model? But right now, it's a shell game, and what's happening in these organizations, they've blown their green initiatives out of the water by embracing these technologies. And as a result, they're buying up carbon credits. But that's ultimately robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, in terms of a saying. I think what's ultimately going to happen is there's going to be more and more economic pressure on these companies to create more cost-effective, energy-efficient models, because not all countries have unlimited access to water, to power. I mean, if you look at some of the cloud providers in Ireland right now, they're running really up to their limit in terms of consumption. And then you've got other areas that have room to grow. You've got large hypervisors like Microsoft bringing on nuclear power plants and small nuclear generators. In fact, they're going to bring on online 3 Mile Island out of the northeast of the United States, which was extremely controversial in the 70s because it had almost had a nuclear meltdown. And so, you know, it's fascinating in a sense because 10 years ago we weren't talking about nuclear power. Not for data centers. We were talking about how do we get a more solar, how do we get wind energy, and now we're talking about no, we need the power now. And so these energy conversations are yet to be finalized. But right now, uh, the power, the water consumption models are unsustainable. And so we've got to look at ways, we've got to put pressure on these providers to look at ways to become more green because, as much as I embrace technology, you know, I want power for people to, provide light for their family and warm meals for their bellies. And, to me, the AI is secondary to that. We've got to be very cautious about our policies and procedures to make sure there's a balance.
Yes, yes, great. So I think you gave like great insights into investment strategy and digital transformation, and finally about AI. So before we wind up, like any final piece of advice for our audience and how to navigate this current economic situation, the global uncertainties, and yet achieve success in their business?
Yeah, I think my advice is you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to get out of even your own vertical. I've been fortunate enough to work in multiple industries, and with each time I've brought in sort of a best of breed solution that worked in every industry. Everybody likes to think their data is unique. It's not. Everybody likes to think their industry is highly unique, and there's aspects of it you can learn from others. And I think it's important to, when you look at talent, look for diversity of industry. Um, I think that's important to have. I think it's important to know what's going on in the world. We don't live in a bubble, and so it's important to know what's happening out there. These energy issues that affect the Middle East affect the rest of us. These energy issues that affect Europe affect the rest of us, and so you really have to be mindful about what's happening out there. Understand not only what's happening in your business, but what's happening in the world.
Okay.
And that's my advice, right? It's, make sure you're out there, make sure you're meeting with other leaders, make sure you're talking, you're having these open discussions about what's happening in their world, and understanding that, what affects one industry will ultimately affect the other, not only from a cybersecurity perspective, but a regulation perspective, a consumption-based model. And so be out there, network, get out of your comfort zone, learn what's happening in the world, learn what's happening with other leaders. It'll make you a better leader.
Yeah. So I have follow-up questions. So do organizations reduce their budget, or they should look for any other affordable alternatives?
I think always. I think to your point is that, you know, prior to a contract being renewed, especially one that's been in place for a while, many organizations look for 3-year contracts. By the time year 2 comes up, reevaluate. What are other solutions out there? I think right now, when you think about cost optimization, that's really in vogue. You're going to have to look for lower cost solutions. I think you're going to have to say, in this case, does it, you know, we're not using 100% of this capability. We're using 90%. Does this other company offer comparable features and comparable solutions at, a more affordable price? Can they also meet our security demands? Can they meet our compliance demands? But do they meet our functionality demands? Don't be so set on a solution that you're not open to other alternatives out there. Uh, there are some really, great software out there that aren't necessarily number one in the market, and I think it's important to understand that and to understand that landscape.
Okay, makes sense, JJ. So yeah, you shared some great insights. So thanks for your time. It was great talking to you.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye
day.
bye.
Yeah. Bye.